Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to next year's Development Discourse. Next year is a multi-competency advisory firm focused on solving complex development questions. We work mostly with federal and state governments and their development partners. And Development Discourse is our public policy discussion platform we use to bring pragmatic ideas to those complex development challenges we face. I'm pleased to have Andrew Thorburn as my guest today. Andrew is the chairman of Thorburn Associates, which has focused on private sector development and investment promotion efforts in Europe and sub-Saharan Africa over the last 3 decades. In recent years, Andrew worked with the government of Rwanda to set up their special economic zone and industrial park infrastructure funded through blended finance solutions, mainly from non-government sources. During this same period, he also supported Nigeria's Investment Promotion Commission and several state investment promotion agencies in Nigeria. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody.
Let's start from the top. Nigeria was rising the charts as an interesting investment destination in Africa, but seems to have lost some grounds to emergent countries like Morocco, Egypt, and obviously the leader of the pack, South Africa. What are the current trends in investment promotion or the current trends in foreign direct investment flows into Africa?
Well, I mean, over the last 5 years, globally, foreign direct investment flows have been up and down, mainly down. Obviously, tensions with between America and China, obviously COVID, obviously the general unsettled economic situation has meant that investments have globally fallen by about a third. They're just starting to recover a bit now, but very small so far. As far as Africa is concerned, we have a tiny proportion of the total investment flows. I mean, when we talk about investment, we're talking about greenfield investment, but also mergers and acquisitions, which is obviously a very big, quite often hidden volume of investment that people don't recognize necessarily as being what we understand as investment, but can quite often be actually a bigger than greenfield investment itself. And if you're looking at Nigeria, you probably say, yeah, if I was a big investor looking at a big market like Nigeria, I might go in with a partner or buy a company who's already doing things up there rather than taking the risk of a greenfield. So yeah, but Africa is a very small part of the foreign investment pie, considering the huge size of Africa and the huge potential it offers potential investors.
So how does a country position to become attractive for foreign investors? And maybe answer that question on the backdrop of what Morocco and Egypt has done in the last few years to become more attractive for foreign direct investment.
Well, I think first of all, you start out with a government that actually sets out its stall professionally and properly. They get a message out there. Their embassies work with the government. They have an investment promotion structure that has one voice, and that makes things happen, and that makes investors happy, and that message gets out, and more people come in. And it's also to do with the strategy. They have understood where they can compete and where they can't compete. They can compete because of their location conditions or because of their factor conditions, whatever it may be, but they've understood the basis of competition and they push that to investors in a targeted manner. It's all very well talking about in generalities about we're open for business, but that really doesn't help very much if you are a particular type of investor looking for example, agricultural land, and how do you get your hands on 1,000 hectares or 30,000 hectares of land in Nigeria? Good luck. So you got to get the message out that you are open for business and that business can come and see you and things will happen. And I think that's perhaps what these countries have done very well. What Ethiopia had done very well. Obviously, it's a bit of a problematic area right now. But I don't think the message has yet got out in Nigeria. And the Nigeria image issue is one that for a timid investor, many investors in particular Europe and North America are quite timid. It's a big question.
When you say image, what are you referring to? Is it corruption or is it insecurity or both or what else?
It's a combination of all the positives, all the negatives that resonate with an investor, and different investors and different sectors have different risk appetites. So, for example, the extractive sector have quite high risk appetites because they know, particularly if you're going into whether it be the oil and gas sector or the mineral extractive sector, you're going to be in fairly wild and woolly conditions. And so you have to be tough and just get on with it. Whereas if you are in the financial services sector or doing innovative things that require skills and a proper IP protection, then that's different. You are lower risk.
So the fact that we have high insecurity or relatively high corruption does not foreclose us from approaching the foreign investor market.
No, not per se, but you would have to understand that, the policy environment is also important. For example, I was reading an article a couple of days ago saying, well, Nigeria over the past 10 years has had a number of very interesting policies. For example, the policy of 35% import duty on automotive. Mm-hmm. And so that brought in a whole lot of automotive assembly companies who decided that this was a fantastic opportunity. Well, they got them all in here, and then all of a sudden the import duty goes from 35 to 5. Mm. So what does that do to the whole business model that brought the investors in here in the first place? So a consistent and non-flipping policy environment is also very important.
And a lot of talk around enabling environment, ease of doing business and so on. How important is that to investors who are really looking to take advantage of the huge markets that Nigeria potentially portends, and or want to have a big footprint in Africa? How does that really affect their decision? We know it's important to do, important to fix, and Nigeria has made some progress, but is it a deal breaker?
I think it depends. It's, for example, one of the issues right now that is probably a bit of a deal breaker is the currency situation. So the forex, the two exchange rates is clearly a tricky one for investors, where they are going after the domestic market without any potential export revenue coming back to them, and that clearly can be a problem. But other than that, experienced investors have a look, and they can usually work out whether or not within the existing constraints, if you wish, in the business environment, they can still make money. And that's the name of the game. The problem that they have is when the government is inconsistent.
Yeah, so that old saying that, investors can deal with risk, it's uncertainty that, becomes a bit of a challenge. Yeah. We've got a set of new governments coming into power in about a month's time. At the federal level and at the state level. If you were sitting with the incoming Nigerian president today, what would you lay out for him, to focus on doing, say, in the first 100 days?
I'd say, perhaps a bit cheeky, but I'd say to Mr. President, you have an opportunity to reset the image of Nigeria. And I suggest that you send your Minister of Trade and a newly appointed and professional head of IPC to go and see the top 50 or 100 companies that you want to come to Nigeria and ask them what it will take to get them here. And see what you can do. And you drive that way, you drive a whole discourse and a discussion that I think has been missing at that level in the past.
Some would argue that should be a role the president himself should take on, and that would show the seriousness that he accords it. But you suggested the Minister of Trade.
The president clearly is and can be when they're good, the national salesman. Absolutely, no question about it. But in this particular instance, I think the world recognizes that this particular incoming president has got a huge amount on his plate, and he should pick somebody who's a minister who can actually get this work done for him. And at the right moment, you can make the introduction and meet the president.
Excellent. And so one other question that keeps coming up in the discussions around investment promotion is, do you have one agency that tries to market the country internationally, or should you have the different states have their own investment promotion agencies going out to the same market, selling their message? Where do you fall on this argument?
I think if you look at something like the US doesn't really have a national investment promotion agency. So the states get on with it and do their own marketing strategies and their own promotion, and in fact their own tax regimes, which seems to work pretty well for America. Still the leading destination for foreign investment around the world, and the same with China, who also really, the embassies sort of do a bit of general promotion for China, but on the other hand, it's the states and the provinces that go out and sell the business. Nigeria, the product for Nigeria is so diverse and so amazingly huge. It's difficult, I think, for one single agency sitting in Abuja, even with regional offices, to really make much of an impact. So I'm a great promoter of states to at least help the federal government better promote the country. But I think where an NIPC or whatever the successor of an NIPC might be would be playing a good role is a signposter. So, for example, a big investment project that they may identify comes to NIPC, and NIPC goes to the state IPAs and said, right, you've got 4 days. This is what the investor's looking for. We'll bring the investor to the top 3 states. And that gives you the opportunity to make these states shape up, because some state IPAs are good, some states don't even have IPAs yet. So that infrastructure to promote investment opportunities in Nigeria is still very embryonic in many ways.
So let's flip it now. You're done talking to the president, and you're now, talking to a governor of a state. And let's assume this governor really wants to do the right things, right? And wants to set up a functional, effective state investment promotion agency. What are the building blocks of a successful IPA? What departments should it have and why? How does it all fit together? What type of human beings, should be recruited to work in this? Just help us a master class, in a few minutes of how to set up an IPA and what it should do. Okay.
Well, first of all, an IPA, you need to decide where that structure is going to be placed and who it's going to report to. And is it, in fact, just an investment promotion agency you want, or is it a development agency you want? i.e., is it enough to bring investment in? What about supporting existing investors? Do you need to have a mechanism to help them access finance, to help them access skills, infrastructure, land? Do you need an integrated agency like they used to have in the UK, the Scottish Development Agency, the Welsh Development Agency, the Irish Development Agency? Or do you just want to focus on investment promotion and facilitation? Assuming you only want to focus on investment facilitation.
Which do you suggest, from what you know of Nigeria and the states, and where we are in terms of human capital, in terms of the quantum of problems we need to deal with? Which do you suggest?
Well, my first foray into investment promotion in Nigeria was in InvestJigawa. We helped set up InvestJigawa in 2013 under the GEMS 3 DFID-funded program. And that was in pure play investment promotion. And we set up a marketing department, an investor servicing and facilitation department, and an advocacy team. And the advocacy team was there to try and help smooth the business environment issues and help investors with particular issues they might have. And that seemed to work quite well. We had after 2 or 3 years, we had a pipeline around about $50 million. Unfortunately, much of it was in the solar energy space, which, of course, at that time was impossible to invest in. So that didn't work out very well. But certainly that showed that there's plenty of appetite to invest in what was a relatively small and unknown state, Jigawa, at that time. So the agency reported to the governor.
Okay.
I think the first thing is, if the governor is serious about bringing in new investment to the state, then he needs to take control. I mean, he's going to be the chief salesman anyway, that he needs to have an agency that he can work closely with and that he trusts. And that agency needs to, first of all, understand the product. Does it have all the information about the product, which is the state? Does it know the cost of things? Does it know who are the leading what are the leading sectors? Does it know who are the existing investors? Are they happy? What is the pitch? Where do you compare in your state compared to other states? Where are you going to compete, and where are the investors you're going to be targeting located? Are they located already in Nigeria, or are they located outside Nigeria? If they're outside Nigeria, how are you going to make contact with them? So you've got to have a clear strategy, and the strategy should, I think, be aligned to the overall state needs. I mean, what does the state need? What can you offer, and what do you want? So a clear strategy is an important one, and it's got to be quite granular, because investing is a detailed process. It's all very well to go to events and wave your flag and say invest in Nigeria, or invest in Jigawa or Kano or Ogun or Lagos, but really it's down to the nitty-gritty. Investors want to know the detail, and you've got to have the detail. So you've got to have the information. You've got to have a team that can sell that information and translate the information you have into relevant information that an investor can use. And then you've got to have the infrastructure. If an investor wants to do agriculture in the north, then where's the land? And how long is that going to take him to get hold of the land? What's the process? We had the land acquisition resettlement framework, which took us a year to build in Jigawa, which meant that it was quite clear how you could access land. The investor could read that document, the state could read the document, everybody was on the same page, so to speak. And so if you have that, and it's clearly, a roadmap is clear, then everybody understands. The infrastructure, same with all of those things. So really, when you're talking to investor, they have to see that you understand what they need and you can make it happen for them. For that, you need a team, a mixed team, people who understand finance, people who understand construction, people who understand business in general, and people who have a good understanding of the sector dynamics.
It's interesting. I was reading a piece in The Economist of this week, and it's on how Detroit is seeing a bit of a renaissance, since the economy tanked. And it said the city of Detroit has become, for the investors, not just a real estate agent, but a HR manager. So basically the city says to the investors, we're going to help you from the beginning, from finding a place to locate to finding the people, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the difference between an IPA and a development agency, or am I reading it wrong?
I think an IPA could do that, and there's Detroit's an excellent example. There's another example in Louisiana, and Louisiana will say to an investor, "You come while you're building the factory. We'll give you the land, we'll give you the incentives, but while you're building the factory, tell us who you want to hire. We will find these people for you, and we will train them so that when the factory is ready, they are ready as well." That's a fantastic pitch. And we did something similar in the early days of the Czech Republic with Czech Invest. We had a job creation grant scheme, and we said to the company, "You come in, you build your factory. While you're building your factory, you train these staff, and we will pay their salaries until the factory is ready.
Interesting.
And that really aligns their interest, because while they're constructing, they're not making any money. But by giving them that support, then it's not costing them as much as they would otherwise have to spend. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. And at the same time, that deal in the Czech Republic, and I think in Louisiana, is conditional. You have to keep these guys fully employed for 3 years minimum.
Correct. So one of the questions, or one of the discussions I've had with you in the past, is on how do you staff an IPA? What type of people are you looking for, even down to what age range, are you looking for? And how do you remunerate these guys, to be able to attract top talent and also to retain top talent?
So the first place I worked in investment was in Scotland, and in Scotland we had the Scottish Development Agency in those days, and we were paid private sector rates, absolutely average private sector rate, not high, but relatively well, and we had a small bonus program to enable people who are high flyers to get an additional payment. Not a huge amount of payment, but it was very much a private sector culture in the agency. And I think that's important for an IPA. You are a friend of the investor inside government, but you are the bridge, because I think we all understand that on the whole, government doesn't know how to talk to business, and business doesn't know how to talk to government. And so that IPA is a critical communication bridge between these two types of people who don't really understand each other and where they're coming from. And so it's important that you have people who have a good understanding of the private sector. But you don't need lots and lots of people like that. What you need are young, well-educated, articulate people who can work 24/7, because that's the name of the game. It's a really exciting game. But if you're having to talk to an investor in Japan or something like that, well, you've got to work on their time zone, not on your time zone. You can't say, "Oh, excuse me, it's a bit late." You've got to work with them. So the whole opportunity is take some young graduates with a couple of years experience and give them some proper training from your graybeards like you, Patrick, who know and understand business, and then they will perform. And I think that is a better way of doing it. And it's not to say don't take any civil servants. There are plenty of civil servants who can make the jump. Absolutely no problem at all. But they've got to be young, and they've got to be energetic, and they've got to be fearless, because selling is not easy. And
I think what you've defined here is, some of the, in my view, more successful IPAs we have in Nigeria, the people who run them and the people who are at the helm are these same young people, who are eager to make a name for themselves or to make some kind of success. Kaduna Investment, comes to mind. I love that shop. I love the way they run it. Anambra State has just, made a move in getting Mark Okoye, in to run the place. Smart, sharp, used to be in investment banking. We're expecting that he'll do well. So I think that could be a model, that many states take a look at. But if you could spend a bit more time and talk about this bonus thing, because I'm pure private sector. I think private sector, and I think if you remunerate people well, they'll do well. What type of structure can a government look at for figuring out how to remunerate these people? We're not saying pay top of the market, but tied to performance. How can that be funded somehow?
Well, right now, having a look at the state government finances, wherever you look in Nigeria, times are tough. Obviously for the federal government as well. So there's not much spare cash splashing around. So I really don't have a solution for that, Patrick. I'm going to leave that one to you. That's a political decision that governors and government has to take. But I do think that money motivates. But I'm not sure that it necessarily. I think the the young guys and girls in Kaduna are having a wonderful time. And you take these young people, you give them the responsibility they would never, ever normally have. You're introducing a guy of 25, 27, 30 to senior executives from international companies and from national companies. They're getting exposure they would never otherwise get. It's like an MBA without having an MBA. You're seeing companies actually make the decision to invest and creating a new business. I mean, that is invaluable experience. So in the Czech Republic and other countries that I've worked, these youngsters, they work for 4 or 5 years in the agency, and then they get hired by the people they've been bringing in, because
interesting,
fantastic, very, very highly motivated, very, very well skilled people by the time they leave.
So that could be the incentive I'm looking for, that you work in government. So it's, again, that revolving door. You work a few years in government, and then you cash it in, working for private sector.
And that's what the Americans have done very well, and still do. I'm not sure that it's quite so. I mean, it seems to me in Africa and in Nigeria, you want to be a civil servant because you have that huge protection and that cushion, but it's a comfort zone that you will not leave.
Okay, and in some of our conversations on investment promotion, there's always this idea that the government can achieve some quick wins, so focus on a sector and get some quick wins. Is that real? How does that work in investment promotion? Can you set out today and in a year's time get a business in, or what's the lag, the gestation period, for bringing these investments in?
Okay, well, if you're starting from scratch, let's say we're starting from scratch and we're talking to whatever state it is and they want to set up an IPA. So it's going to take you, I don't know, 4 to 6 months to set up your IPA, get the legals done, get your premises, get your budget, everything like that. In the meantime, let's assume that you have selected 4 or 5 key sectors and you have the detailed information you need about these sectors, and you understand that you have a targeted approach, and you've identified for each sector, you've got 20 target investors that you want to go after, and that you have a team that understands how to do that. So let's assume that you've done all that in 6 months, and good luck. It'll probably take you a year, but so that's the first thing. So once you have contacted an investor, the investor may be ready to move right away, but the investor may be ready to move in 2 years. So investment promotion is a medium-term game at best. Quick wins can happen for sure, but rarely do they happen. And if you think about it, the process of investing in a country like Nigeria, it's quite bureaucratic. And that takes time to get the right permissions, to get your incentives lined up, to get your import licenses lined up, to get your visas lined up, your work permits lined up, to get your construction going, to get your land access going. All that takes time. So if you catch an investor at the right time, you might get a deal signed in a year, and then operating in what, two or 3 years after that. So if a governor starting now, by the end of his first term, he should have some investments if he's really been efficient. But I wouldn't say that it's going to happen next year, sir, because if you do that, you're promising something that is unlikely to happen. Correct.
So at best, it's a medium-term play, but it's an important play. You must start now, so that, by the end of your first year, second year, those gains have started coming in, and you've built a foundation that your successor can build on. So another thing that we focus a lot on in Nigeria, really the hard assets, so like manufacturing, agriculture, not a lot of focus on services, but one may argue that could be the place we should be looking. If we look at, again, contributions to our GDP, services, have since the resizing of our economy has been a great contributor to Nigeria's GDP. But even more importantly, we've got millions of unemployed people, so maybe that's an area we should be looking at. In your work, how have you seen this evolve over time, and where should any serious government be looking?
Well, I don't think any serious government should ignore manufacturing. But you're quite right, it's going to take some time, and you've got to get the infrastructure right. And right now you could argue that competitive manufacturing in Nigeria is not so easy for the various reasons I think we all understand. But I think services, you're absolutely right. I think the service sector here in Nigeria is relatively undeveloped. You think about call centers and BPO, right down the west coast of Africa, whether it be Morocco or Senegal, South Africa, there are call centers and booming BPO operations operating, and yet in Nigeria it's relatively undeveloped as a sector. And look at the IT and IT sector. Look at software development. We have a little hub in Lagos, but compared to the global demand for this sort of talent, we're just sort of playing around at it. So it could be a huge employment, and we have plenty of well-educated young graduates who are not really very well fulfilled at the moment. So it seems to me it's an opportunity to really run with BPO and call centers, not just for graduates but for students, because that's the way it works elsewhere in the world. So I could see why can't we have 1 million jobs in the BPO sector in 5 years' time?
Maybe power is a challenge.
But
IT infrastructure.
Your IT infrastructure, yes, but it is. We know from our recent conversations with Outsource Global that they can handle that and they can manage that, and they are making money. So I think that's a good example of an opportunity that needs to be built on.
Interesting. I wonder if you can, maybe use the automotive industry to paint a picture for us on how a government can think about, selecting or prioritizing the sectors to focus on. So here I'm referring to, some of the work you did with NIPC and trying to figure out how to prioritize different sectors in Nigeria, and automotive kind of popped up, but was not an immediate opportunity. So I'm looking at just unpacking how to look at sectors and some of the supporting industries that must be in place for that sector to be a priority sector.
Well, of course, one of the key benefits of successful investment promotion is not just the direct investment, but the indirect investment that comes after that. When we worked in the Czech Republic, I remember when we brought in Toyota, it took us 2-3 years to bring in a Toyota engine plant into just outside Prague, and they brought with them 30 other companies. Were their suppliers. So they are the tier 1 OEM, and you get the tier 2s and the tier 3s, and that gradually not only does it create local supply chains, but obviously spin-offs into the local economy. So it was a huge economic impact, and that I think is the interest. Why is it that you have Morocco at one end of the continent, South Africa at the other end of the continent, and nobody's making cars in the middle?
Yeah. Why is that? Why won't Toyota come to Nigeria?
Toyota's looked at Nigeria. We know that because when we were doing this under GEMS 3, we had a word with Toyota. They said that they didn't think the policy environment was at all attractive, and that they didn't see how they could make money.
So the big question for many of these investors is the policy environment, consistency, whatever it is the government wants to do, say it and stick with it. What else?
I think if you were going to talk about a full manufacturing plant rather than just assembly, what we have now is assembly. I don't think we have mainly SKD and not CKD. So there's quite a long way to go before we're going to get full manufacturing. But clearly you need to start building up your supply chains. You need to build up your tier 2 and your tier 3, 2 and 3 service providers, so that you can actually, when an investor comes, you can say, okay, that's where I can go. I mean, we could take a 500 hectare site somewhere in the south, probably with the south, and make that the automotive park, and then start talking to these companies, as I've suggested. The new president goes and talks to the head of Toyota and said, right, what do we need? What do we need to make this thing happen? I think we now understand in Nigeria what needs to happen to attract a serious investor in the automotive sector and to start manufacturing. Now, manufacturing is probably, full manufacturing will be 10 years away. But in the meantime, we allow them to import, and gradually we reduce imports because we are creating the local supply chains. Why are we not making tires anymore, for example?
And could the fact that we're not making tires be the reason why a Toyota would not come? So because for a Toyota to come, there needs to be all of those other support industries. The fact that we don't have them, would it make them not come? Should we focus on bringing the support industries before we start talking to? How do you sequence that conversation?
Chicken and egg. Yeah. I mean, ideally, if Toyota come, they're going to have to bring their support industries with them. Whether it be Toyota or the Americans or the Koreans or even the Chinese. And there are lots of different options now.
Is there an argument that we do not have the purchasing power in Nigeria to buy brand new cars? And that could be a reason why the automotive space is not as attractive?
I wonder if we don't have the purchasing power, or we don't have the financing mechanisms in place. And I think it's more the financing mechanisms in place. We need to have proper insurance. We need to have proper credit mechanisms where people can trust that it's going to work, and the banks are not going to be stiffed. So that whole regime needs to accompany anybody seriously interested. And it's not just to do with cars. That the whole banking system needs to, in a sense, upgrade itself a little bit and become a bit more sophisticated in its financing tools.
So let's speak again about maybe industrial zones, right? Because I know if you read the manifestos of many of the federal government, state governments, everyone's talking about setting up an industrial park and bringing in anchor investors and so on. I know that we worked on setting up a Kogi cassava processing zone. And what was attractive about that idea, and why did it not work at the end of the day? And maybe there's some lessons in there for state governments as they think about setting up these zones.
I think the land acquisition process was torturous and, as it turned out, slightly corrupted. So that made it quite difficult. The decision-making process took 4 years for Cargill to get nowhere. So eventually, when a strategic decision was taken at global headquarters to review all projects, and those that weren't advancing were killed, we lost out.
So Cargill, big commodity player, probably the biggest in the world, was interested in siting in Kogi. Yeah. So that means Nigeria is attractive to big international investors. But
and they had the off-takers. This was a very sophisticated, and this is what is so exciting about Nigeria. This was a very sophisticated deal. It wasn't about growing cassava. It was about the byproduct of cassava that was going to service the brewing industry in Nigeria. So it was all there. The value chain that was going to be created was colossal, and it was the incompetence of the federal and state authorities that couldn't make it happen. And I have to say, probably combined with a little bit of the World Bank bureaucracy that slowed things down quite a lot. But
yeah. So
the idea of industrial zone is a very attractive one. But once again, think who's going to what do these investors need to see in that industrial zone? If you go to I'm sure many people in the audience have been perhaps to Ethiopia and seen some of the zones there. They're quite expensive, and they are very well appointed. Doesn't mean to say because of that they're necessarily going to be successful. So understand who is going to be in that zone and what do they need. What sort of waste disposal do they need? What sort of energy provision do they need? What sort of infrastructure they're going to need? It's not just a random zone on the side of a motorway that sort of says, okay, here we are, here's some space. It needs to be a bit more sophisticated than that. You need a strategy.
I wonder if you can, because, so I'm a bit partial to that Kogi idea, and I thought it was a brilliant idea, and it, was quite painful when we couldn't pull it off. But a new government will come in Kogi. Kwara can do the deal. Places in the south, in the north, and we have factor endowments everywhere in the country that similar deals can be done. If you could just describe for us, the design of that project and what a serious state government or a combination of state governments like a regional development agency could do to bring such a transaction to their region or to their state.
Well, as you know, the African Development Bank are financing a sort of successor to the staple crop processing zones, or strategic SAPZs, I think they're now. So obviously you've got to have land. You've got to have land with the right infrastructure and the right location. The land has got to be properly titled, and the people who are using the land have got to be properly compensated, so that there's no ESG issues for foreign companies coming in and finding that they are going to be surrounded by unhappy former landowners, as, for example, has happened in Jigawa with an investor up there. So and that's been in the courts for 4 years. So get the land sorted. Be very clear what the strategy is going to be, who is going to use that site, and start promotion early. Start promotion early, but be aware that the credibility, no one's going to take you seriously until they see the infrastructure there, the energy infrastructure, the logistics infrastructure, and the access to market infrastructure, wherever that might be.
So I have a question here from an Ayodeji Odeji, and he says, according to the latest World Bank report, diaspora remittances in the last 8 years is about 1.68 billion and about 2.1 billion in 2022. Are there policies that government can deploy to harness some of the remittances to go from supporting just welfare economics or consumption to actually stimulating economic growth nationally?
Gosh, it's absolutely fascinating. This discussion, wherever I go in Africa, this discussion, somebody says, how do we harness the diaspora investment? My response is always the same. First of all, diaspora are diaspora for a reason. They're not coming back. They left your country and they're not going to come back. And it's very rare that diaspora come back in numbers and invest. Now, having said that, of course, Patrick, you were diaspora and you came back. But you're going back again. So it's quite hard. If you're going to bring the diaspora money back, you've got to bring the diaspora with it. They're not going to do it without coming back themselves. You have an agency for diaspora in Nigeria. They have diaspora agencies all over Africa. I have yet to see a diaspora strategy with bring substantial and significant greenfield investment to a country anywhere in Africa. And even the Scots and the Irish, who have huge diasporas, even they very rarely come back and invest in the country. The diaspora, if they're successful, if they've made lots of money abroad, they are hard-nosed, successful businessmen, and they will look at your country or their former country with the same hard-nosed perspective as they will any other business deal.
Yeah. And I guess the point you're making aligns with how India got its second wave or maybe third wave, where the non-resident Indians who still had affiliations and, sentimental tiebacks to the mother country, but they had built businesses, built skills, joined global networks, and they could take all of that back to India when India indicated that it was receptive, to such ideas, such people. And they brought that connection between India and the rest of the world. And we're seeing the boom in India today. Manufacturing is beginning to move from China, to India. So it comes back again to that policy discussion. How does the government, set the stage to show the world and show Nigerians first, that it's ready and open for business in the real sense of it. And some of that will come back.
And my view is that one of the things that the government could do is to start creating the database of highly successful Nigerian diaspora around the world and have a chat with them.
So part of this chat that the president should have with global business leaders, he should also be having with successful Nigerians in the diaspora, correct?
Absolutely. And I don't know if I'm always very impressed whenever the president of Rwanda goes around the world. He will meet with his local Rwandan diaspora, which is obviously tiny compared to the Nigerian diaspora.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Ayodeji is regarding that state governments do not control national fiscal or even monetary policy. Are there other assurances that the states can offer investors to guarantee their investments to specific programs within their state? So, we know that they can do the tax rebates, but, really the states do not control the major taxes. So what is it that the states can put on the table, to make these investors find their states, attractive?
I think there are a number of things. First of all, obviously skills. I would certainly, if I'm a governor in Nigeria, I would be horrified at the way my universities do not support the investment community, do not in fact support the business community. They sit there and they have a lot of talent inside them, but we don't use universities to support economic development. So I would certainly bring my universities to bear to support investors as they come in with skills, but also with research. And that's a two-way benefit. So the next thing is, the land process, whatever it be should be streamlined and easy, fair but easy and transparent. And of course, suppliers, the supply chain and the local skills in the supply chain. Make sure that you have a supplier database. It's part of our NICPS that we worked on, Patrick. So you need a supplier database. You need to understand your market. So you can say to the investor, in our state, we have these suppliers. They will feed into your process. But in the next door state, we have suppliers there as well. So all in all, we have a story for you. When you come to our state, we can meet your requirements.
Because not only do we have information on our state, we have information on other neighboring states, to show you that the market you're tapping into is a much larger market, but we can attract you to our state because we are the ones who've done the hard work of collating this information, But I have a question here from Solomon Adeleye. He says, industrial parks mean different things to different people. What are the basic components that must feature in an industrial park for you to be able to attract foreign direct investment?
One of the things that we worked on in Rwanda, and we worked with it in Scotland, and we worked on it in the Czech Republic as well, which was quite successful, was what we call advanced factory units. In other words, it's very nice to have an industrial park with the right road layout, the waste disposal, the energy, logistics, perhaps warehouses, but there's nothing much easier to get an investor involved if you can say to him, see that building over there? You can have that for a small amount for the next year or two until you build your own factory. So the purpose of industrial park is to remove any constraint to get your business up and running as quickly as possible. If it's all there and it's all working, he can see or she can see that business there. So So it's a question of removing the constraints that he can see in your state. And if you're a well-functioning industrial zone is a very terrific sales tool.
You know, I'm not sure if I've ever shared this story with you, but many years ago, I guess 20 years ago, I was an MBA student, and my university had a relationship with the Northwest Development Agency of the UK. You know, and we did a project for them, and it was how to attract biotech investments to the Northwest region of the UK. And what the region did was they built these biotech labs, right? You know, so when you're talking to a scientist, you know, to say, come and move your business to our region, the scientist is not thinking, how am I going to set up a biotech lab? The biotech lab is there, he comes in, and because investment in biotech follows the scientist, wherever that scientist is located, that's where the investment goes. You know, so the Northwest decided to build these biotech labs around universities and went out and attracted the scientists to come in, and then, you know, the money followed them. You know, so it's interesting, and it fits to what you've just shared.
And I think that the story, the point you made, we've just already made it, is the importance of universities, particularly for sophisticated investors of the type we'd like to see coming to Nigeria. University infrastructure, the university network, the universities are rather being ignored, I think, by the federal government. And, you know, I understand that universities should be able to earn a bit of more money, but they can't the way they're structured. So I would give my university in my state a good kicking and tell them that we want to change the way you do business, and I want you to become a business.
Interesting. And that comes with, you know, maybe doing a real change of the leadership and bringing
why don't you have an industrial zone next to your business university? So that you can then have that again, Rwanda, they brought in Carnegie Mellon as their anchor investor in their innovation city.
Wow.
Which is a 60-hectare site where they're trying to attract the Microsofts and the Ericssons and people like that, who are going to benefit from the Carnegie Mellon output of highly talented, qualified graduates.
Interesting. Another question from Chigo Egero, you know, he's with the AFDB, and he says, which infrastructure should come first for these industrial zones, right? And what is the minimum level of infrastructure, whatever that is, that should be in place, you know, for the zone to be attractive to investors? Is it the roads? Is it power? You know, must you have it as a particular capacity at a particular kilometer? What is it that we must put in place to make it attractive to investors?
Well, I won't name the zone, but there's a zone we've been working with off and on in Nigeria, and the developer has been working hard to get the infrastructure going. He's starting to build the roads. He's starting to put the energy infrastructure in place. But the one thing that he hasn't managed to do is to get the access road. So he's got this wonderful island of potential investment capacity, but nobody can get to it. So the road is very important, but I think the road and the energy are the critical issues. But my sincere suggestion is that to be really competitive, build a couple of empty factory shells and show that to investors and allow those investors to come in. You need to get activity going because activity breeds activity.
Is there a way to get private sector involved in this idea that you've just shared? You know, so building these shells, building the warehouses, you know, building some of this infrastructure. Is there a way that you've seen where governments have incentivized private sector to deploy this as the starting point to then bring in additional investment?
Yeah, there is. I mean, obviously, if the government can't afford to do this themselves, then I can understand why that might not be feasible. Rather than putting the money up yourself, you could offer rent guarantees. So, for example, you say to a developer, okay, I want you to build 10,000 or 20,000 square meters of factory space in 3,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 units. And You build, you finance, we'll work together with you to find the investor. But on the basis that we don't find the investor in time, after year 3, we will guarantee you a certain rental payment until that investor moves in.
Interesting. So it's also a similar.
And to be fair, the World Bank sometimes offers that as a support to the state. So that could be something that
I think I've seen that structure with infrastructure like rail, where the government guarantees a minimum fare.
Yeah.
So whether you get the passengers or not, the government will pay that amount, but you have to deploy the infrastructure, the rolling stock, etc. Okay, so that's a good idea. I have another question from Solomon Adeleye, and he says, do you have a holistic business model that includes the relevant linkages to stimulate and achieve transfer of technology and FDI, to a country? And I think maybe this is out of the back of the Rwandan example of attracting Carnegie Mellon to work with the university. How does that work? What made that deal attractive, for Carnegie Mellon? I'm not sure if you can share on that.
Well, I think the government built the campus for it. So all they had to do was come in and bring their professors. The great thing is it was very flexible, so they could fly their professors in and out. They didn't have to come and live in Rwanda forever. And gradually they were training local academics to take over and to be at the same level and quality as the Carnegie Mellon people. So that worked really very well. But also Carnegie Mellon, because they were part of a park, could see that they would be able to do R&D and support direct training for all the people coming into the park.
Interesting. Well, I guess it all starts with, get up and go talk to these business leaders wherever they are, and do that within your first 100 days, set the tone for your administration, and take it from there.
Absolutely. Good luck, Mr. President, because you have a lot on your plate, but that's one thing I think you should definitely focus on.
Yeah. And, so there's always this discussion around town and gown, and how you link town to gown. We understand the concept of it. We haven't been successful in establishing that relationship between industry and academia, right? What in your view and in your understanding of Nigeria could be the reason why we haven't been able to do that? And are there some thoughts on how we can establish that closer relationship, between our academia and industry?
I think that my experience is mainly in the North. In the North, we have some very large, successful companies, but built really by the strength of the individuals who created the companies. And they really never thought that there would be a role for a university to play in helping them address a particular issue. So we have to change the attitude of companies towards accepting technical assistance and consulting services from outside their companies, which is something that quite often the consulting industry in Nigeria has certain qualities, some of them excellent and some of them not so good. And finding the right consultant can often be a bit of a tricky one for companies. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the universities need to change their attitude to what is their role in life. Their role in life is not to enroll graduates and create unemployed graduates. Their role is to be part of the economic fabric of the country. And if they do that, then the first thing they'll do is they'll set up a commercial arm, as in America, as in the UK. Every university worth its salt has a commercial arm that does two things. First of all, it trawls through the halls of the university and pulls out any innovations they think they can commercialize. So they have a commercialization function, but they also have a second function, which is an R&D and consulting function that will go into the local companies and say, how can we help?
And I mean, the eminent Professor Richard Joseph just dropped a comment in the comment box, kind of validating the point you've made about the challenges with universities in Nigeria and points us to a recent article by Professor Badere in Current History. So it's a problem. It's a problem we need to solve. But I have another question here from Akachi Ngu, and he says, industrial zones are not new in Nigeria, but most of the zones have not performed optimally. What could be the reason for the poor performance of these industrial zones? And I'll tag on the back of that, what do we do about those reasons? So why haven't they performed well? And in your view, what should we be thinking of?
Well, I think it gets back to the whole issue of why were they created and how were they created in the first place? Did they have a clear strategy? Did they have a clear target? What was the purpose of the industrial zone? What need were they meeting? Or was it just an idea that we must have an industrial zone, therefore it's one of those build it and they will come stories, which tends not to be successful. I think you need to understand why you're doing it and what you're doing it for, and be clear that it meets a need. So good feasibility studies are hard to do, but they are important. And if you do a feasibility study, then one of the things you need to do is a demand study. Who are these people going to be that are going to occupy your zone? Why were they occupied? How do you compete for investors compared to other zones? And I think generally states in particular have tended to build the zones and then worry about filling them later. And I think that's the wrong way around.
Yeah. And I mean, what you just shared could be the answer to this question again from Chigo from AFDB, but I'm still going to pose it because I know you have done some work in this space. And he says medical tourism is a big issue in Nigeria. We export doctors and we export patients, right? Have we thought of providing medical zones that solve this problem? We can build hospitals, site teaching hospitals, to train the doctors, put in the virology labs, attract big pharma, etc. Can we do a special medical zone the way we plan for industrial zones?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because you remember, Patrick, a few years ago, we talked to Uchi at NSIA.
Yes.
And the federal government then had plans for NSIA to invest in, I think, six special medical zones. Right. And I don't know what happened, but they didn't happen, I guess. But yes, I think
they did one. I think they did one or two. They upgraded a few teaching hospitals, but not like a medical park, not like the original concept.
And I think the medical park can go further than just providing medical services. I think that as soon as you provide medical services, then you can do medical technology, medical equipment. So yes, I think it's a fantastic idea. And we need to change the attitude of Nigeria, well, Africans in general. I don't know any African who, if they are sick and can afford it, will actually be treated in Africa. Perhaps they might go to South Africa, perhaps, but they will go to, depending on how much money they have, either Europe or America or India or Turkey or wherever it might be, which is sad and unnecessary because we have very good doctors here.
Yeah, and I think there are reasons for that, and the guys in the health space will tell you that there are challenges with our health insurance space, although we're beginning to see some progress in that regard. I think that we're also beginning to see an uptick in social enterprises that are focused on addressing primary healthcare. There are fewer of them that have popped up. So there could be emerging ideas on how to solve some of the health challenges we have. Most of them are still in the piloting phase. We hope that some models will begin to emerge and that other entrepreneurs can step in and copy those models.
But you need next to your skills base and your facilities base, you still need the equipment. So surely the huge opportunity here is equipment.
So I have a question here from Chukuma Okoli. He said, in the discussion you mentioned that the financing system is a key challenge for the Nigerian economy and not availability of finance. So it's my question around purchasing power, and you talked about the financing system. Do you think that the dominance of informal system is a key challenge of the financial system perhaps due to the high risk associated with serving the informal space in Nigeria. Any thoughts on that?
I think certainly. I mean, because I'm involved in the North in particular, we look at the whole issue of how you finance or how you get finance into the hand of smallholder farmers, and how reliable are smallholder farmers in actually paying back the finance, whether it be financed via inputs or whether it be financed via cash. And how do you create that relationship of trust and reliability so that it works both ways? The banks that we talk to have pretty well given up trying to finance the smallholder farmers. So it's too risky, and smallholder farmers think that the government owes them and everybody owes them money and they shouldn't have to pay. But we also know that there are companies who do this very well, because they build relationships. And if you build relationships and don't treat them as sort of profit centers, but actually human beings, it can work. So I think there are ways of doing this, and I don't think that I think the banks around the world, but the banks tend to not to really get out and understand and sniff the air around there and understand what needs to happen, and it can happen, but they don't do it.
Maybe because they've never had any real incentive to do it. They've made money, easy money, but the economy is turning, and everyone's got to work hard now, to make money.
And I'm not sure that you necessarily need to have, I mean, the government has obviously stepped in with its various schemes. I'm not sure how successful they've really been. I think the private sector needs to take over and get on with it.
Yeah. So I've got a question here from Chioma Moma. And she's saying, I'm wondering how foreign direct investment can help reduce the gender gap in developing nations like Nigeria. So I guess maybe some ideas around, will the foreign direct investors be compelled to do X, Y, Z, or I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
I don't think that you are likely to be very successful if you start doing quotas for foreign investors. But I think that foreign investors are driven by their own ESG governance issues, and it makes sense. It makes sense to hire women much more than is currently the case. So I think it's more promoting the women and making sure that the women are given the right opportunities in terms of education and skills development to ensure that they are available to work, rather than imposing quotas on people. I don't think that works. I mean, as a donor project, we have quotas imposed on how many women we should work with, and it's fine. That's the way it works, and so we get on with it. But I'm not sure that in the private sector that necessarily works. I think we've got to make sure that women have the opportunity to be successful, and if that works, then they will be.
Yeah. So a few weeks ago, I was in a discussion with some of the political affairs officers of some European embassies in Nigeria, and this same issue came up around how do you ensure that women, get elected, into office. And I said, well, that's tough, right? Because there are so many factors that drive elections in Nigeria. But the thing that you can do is have a quota for appointments, right? So we can get the government to say we'll meet the 35% female representation in all political appointments. And from there, you pop up, women into top leadership, and then they can go on to win elections, right? I think it's the same thing that could apply here, where women are given a higher, more visible positions in the space, and then ultimately that gender gap will begin to close. But I'm not sure if, again, I agree with you, I'm not sure if imposing that quota, and that, I'm not saying that's what she said in her question, but I'm not sure that imposing that quota could be the way to go.
So I mean, it could be that, for example, for companies that have a certain size or listing on the public stock exchange, you could start requiring perhaps a gender balance on boards and things like that as a way of starting the process. But I think this is more the publicity around it rather than the obligation to do so. And I think that's what we need to. So the government has a role to play in promoting this as a positive and necessary approach.
So another question from Solomon Adeleye.
Solomon, you're very. Thank you very much.
He's very interested in this subject, and the question is, in view of where we are, in the country, and you really understand where we are in the country, the evolving business climate, the political challenges, etc. What will you say are some quick attractions for foreign direct investors? So I guess what he's saying is, where could the new government focus on in their discussions with potential investors? We know that there are things that are broken in the country. We know there's infrastructure we need to get in place. We know there's the business climate. But what are some of, and you can see I'm trying very hard not to use the quick wins, but where are some of the quick wins? Where are some of the things that government can go out, put in front of investors today, and they'll find it attractive?
Well, I think you need to sort the currency thing out. That's number one. I would say that's pretty high up the list of important things that the government needs to talk about.
Currency availability or the exchange rate?
The exchange rate.
Okay.
And clearly, currency availability then follows obviously quite quickly. Other than that, I think the fact that the government is actually reaching out rather than waiting to hear from somebody is already a terrific first step. But when you reach out, you have to reach out in a targeted manner. I mean, you've got to reach out with a story, not just the general blah blah. So that's why I'm saying, only pick the first 100 companies, because it's going to take a while to get the story right.
What, in your view, and maybe experiences from the Czech Republic, experiences from Rwanda, I don't know, I'm assuming that the commercial banks in those countries also help to fund infrastructure in some of the industrial parks. If that is correct, what was in it for the banks, and how can we get our banks, to see that opportunity? Because our banks today are not necessarily, looking at that space.
Well, obviously there are banks who are prepared to look at this, and some of the international banks in particular. IFC will look at it, World Bank will look at it, InfraCredit will look at it. So there are mechanisms out there. I think one of the reasons that the banks are not interested is because they don't see that they see the high risk but not the high return. And because there is no success model that they have been able to understand. So I think once again, if you're talking about a bank and you want first of all, you want 25-year money.
Yeah.
How many banks are giving 25-year money at the moment?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, and that rather goes back to the whole housing situation as well. I mean, in the UK now, you can get sort of 30-40-year money for your mortgage, because so you 7-year money or 10-year money is tricky if you're building long-term infrastructure. So I think you need to look at that from the bank's point of view and from the user's point of view. You can't pay it back that quickly. You have to assume that you need for a 25-30-year project, you need a 3 to 4 year grace period where you're not paying anything back. So how does the bank work on that one? So the financing model needs to be looked at, and then the bank needs to be assured that as they fund this thing, that it actually is quite clear that there's a good strategy in place, that there's initial indications of interest from key investors, like they would in any other due diligence exercise.
Let me shift gears a little bit and move away from investment promotion and talk a little bit about another area that you've done a bit of work in Nigeria, which is financing or getting monies to small and medium scale enterprises. I know that, you know, one of your programs try to work with smaller companies in the Kanu area to do like the Kanu turnaround project. What are your key takeaways from that project in terms of a government that's looking to support SMEs? What are some of the things that it must look at to build a project that actually delivers results? You know, not necessarily project that gets monies to the SMEs, because you can do that, but projects that actually get the SMEs to then turn around and deliver the outcomes that we're looking for.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's deeply frustrating we couldn't get the Kano turnaround program up and running. So what we have learned is that one of the problems that the banks have, and one of the problems that the companies have, is they are not really investor ready. They're not. They don't have. For all sorts of reasons, they don't have a proper business plan. They don't really understand how to talk to a bank. Their strategies are poorly documented. They don't demonstrate they understand their market. They don't demonstrate they understand how to make money or how to make serious money. They don't really necessarily understand how they're going to pay back the loan, so to speak, or they don't understand either what are the other financing opportunities other than bank finance. Could it be private equity? Could it be venture capital? Are there leasing opportunities around? So there's a general lack of sophistication among the SMEs that needs to be addressed, and that's partly PR and communications, but it's also what we found is where things work is a small amount of well-targeted technical advice can change the nature. And so if I were the government, either the Kano state government or the SMIDAN, or whatever SMIDAN becomes under the new administration, I would certainly be, first of all, identifying and qualifying consultants who actually can deliver a good service. And secondly, I would be offering some sort of initial cost-sharing grant scheme, very highly targeted to companies to help them improve the way they do business, improve their competitiveness, but improve their ability to address the key issue for almost every company in Nigeria, is how you access finance at a commercial rate that is not going to ruin you. What we've done in the Links program is we've tried to demonstrate to a small number of companies that if you get a good consultant in and you pay that consultant properly and you listen to that consultant and you manage that consultant, we've helped them to do that, then you come out at the end of it with a story that you can then take to the bank.
So if a government was looking to set up a program, like, and here I'm talking about state government, is looking to set up a program to work with SMEs or MSMEs in the states, what are the core elements that must be in that program to address the real problems we have in Nigeria? You know, so there could be a technical assistance component, you know, where the government pays for some consultants to come in and work with the enterprises.
On a cost-sharing basis, always make the company pay a little bit. You know, free stuff is never valued. Make sure that the company has to put their hands in their pockets as well, because free stuff is just not going to, it's just ignored. There are two things. So first of all, you got your technical assistance, but quite often the technical assistance says, but you need to upgrade your factory, or you need to upgrade your equipment, or you need to do something that change, and that's going to cost money. So how can I, for example, we're working with one company that needs to buy a new piece of equipment, but that's going to reduce their cost per unit by 50%. but unfortunately they have to import it from Switzerland, this piece of equipment.
Mm.
So, getting the dollars and getting the money at a reasonable rate to piece that bit of equipment, it takes time, and it's very complicated. And so that whole process of how you can help company upgrade their capital base or their capital equipment is also something that is quite tricky. And the BOI sort of does it, but the BOI is terribly bureaucratic, as inevitably all state-run banks will be. So it's a tricky one.
So a question from Olumide Lala. What are the main learnings that Nigeria's ecosystem can take away from the investment promotion agency structure in Rwanda? So what are the key differences between the Rwandan investment promotion ecosystem and the Nigeria investment promotion ecosystem? Are there things we can learn from them?
Well, when I think about Rwanda, the population of Rwanda is about the same size as the population of Kano. So you're talking about a quite different scale of things, really. So I think you don't really want to compare one with the other, but I think that the thing about Rwanda is that the government has a sort of a common plan, a common vision. Obviously, you have a pretty dynamic and forceful leader, and he takes personal interest in his IPA. And so the head of the IPA, Claire Akamanzi, is a member of the cabinet.
Interesting.
So that means that
whilst in our case, the head of the IPA reports to a minister, who then reports to the president.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So if you're going to be successful, if you're going to be serious about investment promotion, then elevate it to a proper. I don't think it needs to be. I mean, some African countries have the Minister of Investment Promotion, and that's not necessarily what you want, because then it becomes a ministry and becomes all bureaucratic.
Bureaucratic.
So you want to have your IPA, which is very private sector focused, like a sort of an NSIA, but doing investment promotion rather than investment. And NSA is quite a good model, in fact, because they do have a private sector culture. But the person running that should have access directly to the president and not have to go through anybody else.
So you've mentioned NSIA like 2-3 times, and I guess you're thinking the person who runs the the Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission should be of the same type of profile as the person running NSIA.
Yeah.
And probably the same argument should be made at the state levels as well.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the sort of, I mean, you can't generalize to that extent, but yes, I mean, they should be pretty dynamic, pretty qualified, and understand both sides of the equation, i.e. the public sector and the private sector.
Yeah.
Ideally experienced in both, but at a senior level.
Relationships in both, experienced in both, all of that. Yeah. Okay. Maybe final thoughts. Again, just where we are in the country. Transition's about to happen later in May, and the president and his team, the governors of the 36 states and their teams realize where we are in terms of our economy. They're all thinking we've got to go out and raise foreign direct investment, not a lot of focus on domestic investment. What should, if you just in some quick bullet points, what is it that they should be thinking of, to ensure that effort does indeed yield some results?
Well, I think first of all, you're absolutely right. For states, start off in the easy soft wins. If there are any soft wins, it's finding domestic investors who want to expand to your state, because you can offer them something better. I think the first thing is, let's have a clear strategy, understand what you can and can't offer. We'd all like to have the next Toyota, but you can't all have the next Toyota. So what can you do? What have you got? What are your attributes as a state that enable you to attract, and where are you really good? And let's focus on that to begin with. Where are your strengths, whether it be agriculture or extractives or whatever it might be, whatever crops it might be. Let's start there, and then let's document that, and let's understand the scale of the investment. Are you talking about multi-billion-dollar investments? Or are you talking about, a few $100 million investments? So that enables you then to start targeting. Who are you going to go after? Who is likely to be interested in this? Then do some research on these companies. Find out, what are they doing already? Where are they in Africa already? Why would they be interested in you? Can you see how you and your state can complement their existing plans and strategies? Start talking to people around them. Start doing a dossier on your target companies. And when you're ready to talk to them and you know enough about them, they will appreciate the fact you've done the research and that you know what you're talking about, rather than just going and waving the flag and said, come to this state or come to that state because we have free land or we have lots of this, that, and the other. It's quite a sophisticated game. To play this game seriously, you need to be smart and sophisticated. There's plenty of talent in Nigeria. We have fantastic opportunities, but it takes a lot of hard work. That's what we're missing.
And I think I know I said the last question, but maybe we can get one or two more in. Olumide Lala comes back with a clarification to his question. And he said, my question was specific to the IREME Invest Fund in Rwanda, IREME, that was launched at the COP27. I'm not sure if you're aware of that fund.
I'm not.
Okay.
But let me just say that, Rwanda is one of those strange countries where, small though it may be, it very punches above its weight. So it's now got the Kigali International Finance Center, which is aiming to be a sort of an offshore center onshore, so to speak, for financial services across Africa. They've got the Innovation City, which is designed to educate smart young graduates on anything to do with IT from anywhere in Africa coming to Rwanda. We're visa-free, obviously. And so those things, you necessarily can't at a state level do that because you're obviously constrained by the federal government regulations. But I think there are things that you need to not just carry on as before. There are innovative ideas that every state needs to think about and to have. And the governor that was successful will be the one who takes that innovative idea and doesn't just talk about it.
Andrew, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for making time for this. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Very nice to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.